The emergency alarms echoed through the vast chamber of the Galactic Council headquarters, a sound that had not been heard in over 300 years. Ambassador Zixthor stood at the center platform, his four eyes scanning the gathered representatives from 47 different species. The chamber that usually buzzed with diplomatic chatter and political maneuvering sat in stunned silence. Something impossible had just happened. Humanity had withdrawn from the galaxy. Every human diplomat had been recalled within the past 12 hours. Every embassy had been sealed. Every border checkpoint now turned away ships with cold efficiency. The humans had simply vanished behind their territorial lines like ghosts retreating into the mist. No explanation had been given. No warning had been issued. They were simply gone. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiant, watching the last transport ship dock in the hangar bay below. The transport carried Ambassador Richard Stone and his staff from the Council headquarters, the final humans to leave Council space. Morrison was a tall man with graying hair at his temples, and the kind of weathered face that came from 20 years of service in deep space. His hands gripped the railing as he watched the docking procedure complete. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez approached from the navigation station. She was young for her rank, brilliant with stellar charts and jump calculations, but her face showed concern. She had friends among the alien species they were leaving behind, good people who would be confused by this sudden departure. "Sir, all personnel are aboard," she reported. "We have 143 civilians and 22 diplomatic staff. Ambassador Stone is requesting to speak with you." Morrison nodded and made his way to the conference room where the ambassador waited. Richard Stone looked exhausted. The man had spent 15 years building relationships with Council species, negotiating treaties, and fostering understanding between humanity and the galaxy. Now all of that work had been swept away in a single day. "Captain, do you know why we've been recalled?" Stone asked, his voice heavy with frustration. Morrison shook his head. "My orders came directly from Fleet Command. Retrieve all human personnel from Council space and return to Earth." No explanations were provided. Stone slumped in his chair. 15 years of work, Jake. 15 years of careful diplomacy. Whatever happened, it must be catastrophic. Back on Earth, President Helen Carter sat in the secure bunker beneath the United World Government headquarters. The room was small and windowless, lined with screens showing data feeds from across human space. Around the conference table sat the most powerful figures in human government and military leadership. Their faces reflected the gravity of what they were about to discuss. Director Paul Bennett of Human Intelligence Services stood at the head of the table. He was a thin man with sharp features and eyes that seemed to calculate every possibility simultaneously. He activated the holographic display and images filled the air above the table. 3 months ago, the colony world of New Denver stopped responding to routine check-ins. Bennett began. "We sent a scout ship to investigate. What they found was a population of 50,000 reduced to 1,200 survivors. The colonists had been exposed to biological agents. Not natural, not accidental, deliberately introduced." The room remained silent as Bennett continued. 2 weeks later, the colony on Riverside went dark. Then Jackson's world. Each time we found the same pattern. Biological testing, psychological experiments. Our people used as laboratory subjects. President Carter's jaw tightened. She had seen the reports, read the testimonies from the survivors. Children had been among the test subjects. Families destroyed, lives shattered. "We recovered encrypted communication devices from one of the sites," Bennett said, pulling up new data. "Our best cryptographers spent weeks breaking the encryption. What we found was communications between Council members. They were discussing humanity as a problem to be solved, a threat to be studied and controlled." General Linda Shaw, the head of Human Defense Forces, spoke up. "They authorized this? The Council leadership?" "Not all of them," Bennett replied. "But enough. High-ranking members from the Kryn Empire, the Valian Confederation, and at least 4 other major species. They viewed humanity's rapid expansion and technological development as a potential threat. They wanted to understand our limits, our weaknesses. They decided to find out through experimentation." President Carter stood, her voice cold and controlled. "We've been betrayed. Species we considered allies, partners we traded with, civilizations we respected. They saw us as lab animals, as problems to be managed." She looked around the table. "I've already given the order. All diplomatic staff recalled. All borders sealed. We will not participate in a galactic community that treats us as inferior. The vote was unanimous. On the Council homeworld, the representatives were beginning to understand the scope of the situation. Councillor Thexvar of the Kryn Empire stood at his platform, his reptilian features twisted in dismissal. "The humans are being dramatic," he announced. "They throw tantrums like children when they don't get their way. They will return when they realize they need us more than we need them." But Trade Minister Vorakas of the Pelian Assembly saw deeper. She pulled up economic data on her display screen, her tentacles trembling as she absorbed the information. Humanity controlled 17% of the galaxy's rare earth mineral production. Human factories produced 12% of all advanced manufacturing components. Human shipping lanes carried 23% of all interstellar cargo. "Councillor Thexvar," she said, her voice cutting through his bluster, "if humanity maintains this withdrawal for more than 6 months, 14 major supply chains will collapse. The economic damage will be catastrophic." Thexvar waved a dismissive claw. "Then they will return. They need our markets." Vorakas highlighted another section of data. Humanity has been stockpiling resources for the past 5 years. Every human colony is now self-sufficient. Their internal trade network can sustain their entire civilization indefinitely. We need them far more than they need us. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over them like a heavy blanket. Ambassador Zixthor finally spoke, his voice grave. "We must understand what provoked this action. Send a diplomatic mission to human space. Request a meeting. We need answers." But even as he said it, Zixthor felt a cold certainty in his heart. He had heard rumors over the past year, whispers of unauthorized council projects, black budget operations that bypassed normal oversight. He had dismissed them as conspiracy theories. Now he wondered if he had been willfully blind. Captain Jake Morrison received the message from Council Space 3 days into their journey home. A Council diplomatic vessel was requesting permission to enter human territory to discuss the situation. Morrison forwarded the request to Fleet Command and received his response within minutes. "Denied." The message read, "All Council vessels are prohibited from entering human space until further notice. Use of force is authorized to enforce this directive." Morrison forwarded the denial to the Council ship and watched as it turned away from the border. There would be no negotiations, not yet. Not until the Council understood exactly what they had done. President Carter addressed the United World Government in a closed session, her words broadcast to every human world simultaneously. "We have discovered a betrayal that cuts to the heart of everything we believed about our place in the galaxy," she said. "Council members authorized experiments on our people. They treated us not as equals but as subjects to be studied. 3 of our colonies suffered unspeakable horrors. Thousands of our people died." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "We will not return to the Council until justice is served. We will not negotiate with those who see us as inferior. Humanity stands alone now, but we stand strong. We stand together, and we will not bend." Across human space, the response was unified. Anger, yes, grief for the lost colonies, but also determination. Humanity had faced extinction before, had clawed their way up from a single world to dozens of thriving colonies. They had survived wars, plagues, and the harsh reality of space itself. They would survive this too. 2 months had passed since humanity closed its borders, and the galaxy was beginning to feel the consequences like a slow-moving avalanche that gained momentum with each passing day. The first signs appeared in the manufacturing sectors, where factories suddenly discovered that critical components were no longer available. Parts for faster-than-light drives, quantum processors for navigation systems, and specialized alloys for hull construction all came from human suppliers. Without them, production lines ground to a halt. Commander Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of the UHS Guardian, one of 30 human warships now patrolling the border between human space and Council territory. She was a veteran of 15 years in the fleet, with sharp green eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for following orders to the letter. Her current orders were simple but absolute. No Council vessels were to cross into human space under any circumstances. A Council diplomatic ship appeared on her sensors, broadcasting on all frequencies that it carried ambassadors seeking peaceful dialogue. The ship was unarmed, its shields lowered in a gesture of goodwill. Lisa watched it approach the border checkpoint and opened a communication channel. "Council vessel, this is Commander Lisa Hayes of the United Human Fleet," she said, her voice calm and professional. You are approaching restricted space. Turn back immediately. The response came quickly, the translator rendering the alien speech into smooth English. Commander, we carry diplomats authorized by the Council to negotiate with human leadership. We request safe passage to Earth. Lisa checked her tactical display. 3 more human ships had moved into position, forming a wall of steel between the Council ship and human territory. Request denied, she said. Turn back now. There will be no further warnings. The Council ship hesitated, lingering at the border for nearly an hour as its crew presumably debated their options. Finally, it turned away, its engines flaring as it retreated back into Council space. Lisa watched it go and filed her report. This was the 7th Council ship she had turned away this month. She suspected there would be many more. On the Council homeworld, Ambassador Zixthor sat in his private office reviewing economic reports that painted an increasingly dire picture. The initial predictions had been optimistic, suggesting that the galactic economy could weather humanity's withdrawal with only minor disruptions. Those predictions had been catastrophically wrong. The shipping industry was collapsing. Human vessels had carried nearly a quarter of all interstellar cargo, and their absence created a bottleneck that rippled through every sector. Goods piled up at spaceports waiting for ships that never came. Prices skyrocketed as supply failed to meet demand. 3 major shipping corporations had already declared bankruptcy. Trade Minister Vorakas entered his office without knocking, her tentacles writhing in agitation. Zixthor, we need to talk about the Velian sector, she said, pulling up data on his display. 17 factories have shut down in the past week. Unemployment is rising. There are protests in the streets. Zixthor studied the numbers with growing dread. The military council still believes this is a temporary situation, he said quietly. They think humanity will return to negotiations within months. Vorakas made a sound that the translator rendered as bitter laughter. The military council is staffed by fools. Humanity has been preparing for this. Every human world is self-sufficient now. They have their own trade networks, their own supply chains. They don't need us, Zixthor. We need them. Before Zixthor could respond, his communication console lit up with an urgent alert. Another crisis demanded his attention. This time it was the military. General Krevnak of the Kryn Imperial Fleet stood in the war room of his flagship, staring at maintenance reports that made his blood run cold. His fleet of 200 warships was slowly being grounded. The faster-than-light drives required regular maintenance, and that maintenance required components that were only manufactured in human space. His engineers had tried to fabricate replacements, but the tolerances were too precise, the materials too specialized. How long until we lose operational capability? He demanded of his chief engineer. The engineer's scales flushed with embarrassment. At current rates, sir, 60% of the fleet will be unable to achieve faster-than-light speeds within 4 months. Within 8 months, the entire fleet will be grounded unless we obtain replacement parts. Krevnak slammed his fist on the table. How did we allow ourselves to become so dependent on one species? This is a strategic disaster. But even as he raged, Krevnak knew the answer. Human manufacturing was simply superior. Their quality control was better, their prices lower, their delivery times faster. The Council military had grown dependent on human industry because it made economic and practical sense. No one had imagined that humanity would simply walk away. Meanwhile, in the shadows of Council space, strange things were beginning to happen. A military research station reported complete systems failure during a routine weapons test. Security footage from the incident mysteriously disappeared from all backup servers. A communication relay servicing 3 star systems went offline for 6 hours, and technicians could find no explanation for the outage. These incidents were small individually, but they formed a pattern that Council intelligence could not ignore. Someone was sabotaging Council infrastructure carefully and precisely. Suspicion naturally fell on humanity, but there was no proof. Human ships stayed behind their borders. Human personnel were nowhere near the incidents. Yet the sabotage continued, always just beyond the reach of evidence. Captain Jake Morrison knew about the incidents because human intelligence kept him informed. He sat in his quarters aboard the UHS Defiant, reading reports on his secure tablet. When his door chimed, he closed the files and called for his visitor to enter. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez stepped inside, her face troubled. "Sir, I need to ask you something off the record," she said. Morrison gestured to a chair. "Speak freely, Amy. Are we conducting operations in Council space?" she asked bluntly. The sabotage, the system failures. Everyone thinks it's us, but I haven't seen any orders about covert missions. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. There are things happening that neither of us are cleared to know about, he finally said. What I can tell you is this. The Council taught us many lessons over the years. One of those lessons was how to operate in the shadows when necessary. Draw your own conclusions. Amy understood what he wasn't saying. She nodded and left, and Morrison returned to his reports with a slight smile on his face. On Earth, Director Paul Bennett monitored the situation from his office in Human Intelligence Headquarters. His teams were scattered across the galaxy, invisible and untraceable, making sure the Council understood that humanity was not defenseless. Each operation was carefully calibrated to cause disruption without casualties, to send a message without crossing into open warfare. But Bennett's attention was focused on something more important than sabotage. His people had been working day and night to prepare evidence, to build a case so overwhelming that even the Council could not deny it. Every experiment conducted on human colonists had been documented. Every communication between Council members had been decrypted. Every authorization, every order, every decision that led to the deaths of thousands of humans was being compiled into a single comprehensive file. When the time came to release that evidence, the galaxy would see exactly what the Council had done. President Helen Carter received daily briefings on the galactic situation, watching as the Council slowly tore itself apart. Younger species were beginning to question the leadership openly. The economic crisis was fueling civil unrest on a dozen worlds. The carefully maintained facade of Council unity was cracking. How long do we maintain the isolation? General Linda Shaw asked during one such briefing. Carter considered the question carefully. Until they're ready to listen, she said. Until they understand that what they did was not a minor diplomatic incident, but a crime against an entire species. We will not return to business as usual. The galaxy needs to change, and if we have to burn down the old order to make that happen, so be it. Civilian engineer Danny Cooper worked in a facility on Mars, overseeing the final stages of humanity's independent trade network. The system was beautiful in its complexity, a web of shipping routes and supply chains that connected every human world without touching Council space. It had taken years to build in secret, prepared against the day when humanity might need to stand alone. We're ready, Danny reported to his supervisors. Every human colony has full access to resources and goods. We can maintain this indefinitely. The report was forwarded up the chain of command, eventually reaching President Carter's desk. She read it and felt a grim satisfaction. Humanity had planned for this possibility, and now that planning was paying off. They could wait as long as necessary. The Council could not. Commander Lisa Hayes received a new type of contact at the border. A small vessel, civilian registry broadcasting on emergency frequencies. She moved to intercept and found a ship carrying refugees from a Council world where food shortages had sparked riots. The occupants were not human, but they were desperate. Lisa made a decision that would set precedent for the months to come. This is Commander Hayes to refugee vessel. You are cleared to enter human space. Proceed to Station Mercy for processing. Welcome to humanity's protection. The message was clear. Humanity's quarrel was with the Council leadership, not with innocent civilians suffering from their mistakes. The fractures in the Galactic Council widened with each passing week, turning hairline cracks into chasms that threatened to swallow the entire institution. Trade Minister Vora Cass of the Pelian Assembly stood before her own government's Emergency Council, presenting data that showed her species faced economic collapse within 6 months if the situation with humanity continued. The Pelian worlds depended heavily on trade, and that trade had ground to a near standstill without human shipping and manufacturing. We cannot afford to wait for the Council to resolve this, Vora Cass said, her tentacles gesturing emphatically at the holographic charts floating above the table. Our people are suffering now. Businesses are closing.
It.
Aliens are going hungry. We must act independently. The head of the Pelian government, Chancellor Brektos, clicked his mandibles in thought. You propose breaking with Council policy? That could be seen as treason. I propose survival, Vora Cass replied. The Council leadership made decisions without consulting most of its members. They created this crisis. We should not be forced to suffer for their mistakes. The vote was close, but it passed. The Pelian Assembly would send a secret delegation to humanity, seeking a separate peace. Vorakas volunteered to lead it herself, knowing that if this mission failed, her political career would be over. If the situation deteriorated further, her life might be over as well. Ambassador Lisa Grant waited at Border Station 7, a neutral facility that technically belonged to neither human nor council space. She had been a diplomat before the withdrawal, one of the few who President Carter trusted to handle delicate negotiations. Now she represented humanity in its first official contact with a council species since the severing. The Pelian ship docked, and Vorakas emerged with a small delegation. Lisa studied the trade minister carefully, noting the signs of stress in her movements and the weariness in her eyes. This was not someone playing political games. This was someone desperate to help her people. "Minister Vorakas," Lisa said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Thank you for coming." Vorakas touched Lisa's hand with one tentacle, mimicking the gesture as best her anatomy allowed. "Ambassador Grant, my people are suffering. I come seeking a solution that benefits both our species." They moved to a private conference room where Lisa laid out humanity's terms. The Pelian Assembly would publicly condemn the experiments on human colonies. They would provide testimony and evidence about council members who knew of or authorized these crimes. In exchange, humanity would resume limited trade with Pelian worlds and allow Pelian ships access to certain human shipping routes. "We are not asking you to betray the council," Lisa explained. "We are asking you to stand for what is right. The people responsible for those experiments must face justice." Vorakas reviewed the terms on her data tablet, her tentacles trembling slightly. "If we do this, other council species may retaliate against us. The Kryn Empire in particular has been very aggressive in demanding unity." "Then you will have to decide what matters more," Lisa said quietly. "Political convenience or moral courage? We understand this is not an easy choice, but it is the right one." The meeting lasted 6 hours. When it ended, Vorakas had agreed to humanity's terms. The Pelian Assembly would become the first council species to break ranks and seek independent relations with humanity. Captain Jake Morrison received new orders that changed everything. He was being reassigned from Border Patrol to lead a special investigation team. Their mission was to visit the 3 lost colonies and document everything they found. The evidence would be compiled into a comprehensive report that humanity planned to release to the entire galaxy. His ship, the UHS Defiant, arrived at New Denver 3 weeks later. The colony had been humanity's pride once, a thriving world of 50,000 people building a new civilization. Now it was a graveyard. Morrison walked through empty streets where buildings stood intact, but lifeless. His team spread out with scientific equipment, collecting samples and recording everything. Dr. Karen Phillips led the medical investigation team. She was a xenobiologist who had spent her career studying alien diseases and biological systems. What she found on New Denver made her physically ill. The colonists had been exposed to multiple biological agents over a period of months, each designed to test different aspects of human physiology and psychology. They were systematic about it, Karen told Morrison as they stood in what had been the colony's hospital. First they tested respiratory agents, then neurological ones, then agents that affected the immune system. They documented everything. These people died in agony while someone took notes. Morrison's jaw tightened. "How many survivors?" 1,200 out of 50,000, Karen said, her voice hollow. "Most of them have permanent damage. Neurological issues, organ failure, psychological trauma. The ones who survived did so because they had genetic variations that made them resistant." The council was trying to map human biological weaknesses. The investigation team spent 2 months on New Denver, then moved to Riverside and Jackson's World. The pattern was the same at each location: deliberate exposure to biological agents. Careful documentation. Thousands dead. The evidence was overwhelming and horrifying. Back on the council homeworld, Councillor Thexvar of the Kryn Empire grew increasingly frustrated with the situation. His species had once been among the most powerful in the galaxy, but their influence was waning as economic troubles mounted. He blamed humanity for this decline, convinced that the humans were deliberately trying to weaken the council to advance their own position. "They are playing us for fools," he told his advisors in a private meeting. "We sit here and wring our hands while they strengthen their position and weaken ours." We must show them that the Council is not powerless. His military advisor, General Krevnak, was more cautious. The humans have demonstrated capabilities we did not know they possessed. The sabotage incident suggests they have extensive covert operations. A military confrontation could be disastrous. Thexvar dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. They are bluffing. They have pulled back behind their borders because they are afraid of us. We need to call that bluff. A small operation. Something that sends a message without triggering a full war. Against the advice of more moderate voices, Thexvar authorized a covert strike on a human mining outpost in a disputed border region. The target was chosen carefully, far from major human populations and with minimal defenses. 50 Kryn special forces would destroy the facility and retreat before any human ships could respond. It would be quick, clean, and untraceable. The operation was a success in its immediate objectives. The mining outpost was destroyed, and the Kryn forces escaped without casualties. 47 human miners died in the attack, most of them civilians operating the extraction equipment. Thexvar received the report with satisfaction, certain that he had restored some measure of Council prestige. What he did not know was that human intelligence had monitored the operation from start to finish. Every communication was intercepted. Every movement was tracked. Sensor satellites recorded everything, and the evidence was already being compiled. President Helen Carter stood in the Situation Room beneath United World Government headquarters, watching footage of the attack on the mining outpost. Her face was carved from stone as she saw the explosions, the collapsing structures, the brief thermal signatures of human lives ending. Director Paul Bennett stood beside her, his expression equally grim. "They gave us exactly what we needed," Bennett said quietly. "Proof of Council aggression, proof that they see us as acceptable targets. This changes everything," Carter nodded slowly. "Release everything. The experiments, the evidence, all of it. Let the galaxy see what the Council has done, and prepare a response to this attack. Something that sends an unmistakable message." Within hours, humanity's evidence was broadcast across every available channel in the galaxy. Footage from New Denver showing the suffering of the colonists. Medical reports detailing the biological agents used. Decrypted communications between Council members discussing the experiments. Testimonies from survivors describing their ordeals. And finally, the real-time footage of the Kryn attack on the mining outpost, showing clearly that this was an unprovoked assault on civilians. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Younger Council species, many of whom had already felt marginalized by the older powers, erupted in outrage. Protests filled the streets of a dozen Council worlds. Several smaller species announced they were withdrawing from the Council entirely. The carefully maintained unity that had held the galactic government together for centuries shattered like glass. Ambassador Zixthor watched the broadcasts from his office, feeling a weight of guilt settle over him like a physical burden. He had heard the rumors. He had seen the classified budget allocations. He had chosen to look away, to trust that the Council leadership knew what they were doing. His silence had enabled this atrocity. He made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Zixthor gathered every piece of evidence he had, every classified document he could access, and copied it all to a secure data drive. Then he boarded his personal ship and flew to the human border, broadcasting a simple message. "This is Ambassador Zixthor of the Valian Confederation. I am requesting political asylum in human space. I have information about Council crimes and wish to testify against those responsible." Commander Lisa Hayes received the transmission and made her decision quickly. "Ambassador Zixthor, you are granted entry to human space. Proceed to Border Station 7 and prepare to be taken into custody for processing." The galaxy watched as one of the Council's most senior diplomats defected to humanity, bringing with him evidence that would help seal the fate of those who had authorized the experiments. The evidence that humanity. He released to the galaxy spread like wildfire through every communication network, every news service, every social platform that connected the countless worlds of known space. People across hundreds of planets watched the footage from New Denver, saw the medical records, read the testimonies of survivors. The reaction was not uniform, but it was powerful and it changed everything. Commander Greg Sullivan received his orders 3 days after the evidence went public. He was to lead a response to the Kryn attack on the mining outpost, and his orders were specific about what that response should accomplish. It needed to be decisive enough to demonstrate human capability, but restrained enough to avoid triggering a full-scale war. It needed to send a message that humanity would defend itself without becoming the aggressor that Council propaganda might paint them as. Greg assembled his task force carefully, selecting ships and crews that could execute precision operations. 12 human warships, each equipped with the most advanced electronic warfare systems humanity had developed. They would not fire a single weapon, would not destroy a single ship, would not kill a single person, but they would demonstrate exactly how much power humanity had been holding in reserve. The operation began in the early hours of a morning that most Kryn worlds would never forget. Human ships appeared simultaneously at 17 different Kryn military installations, all within 20 light-years of human space. The installations detected the human vessels and went to alert status, preparing to defend themselves against what they assumed would be an attack. Instead, every system in every installation simply stopped working. Communication arrays went dark. Weapon systems failed to respond to commands. Faster-than-light drives shut down completely. Life support remained functional because the humans had deliberately left those systems untouched, but everything else was rendered useless. Kryn military personnel found themselves sitting in installations that had become nothing more than expensive metal shells. The human ships remained in position for exactly 1 hour, their presence a silent statement of capability. Then they withdrew as quickly as they had arrived, leaving the Kryn military to assess the damage and realize the terrifying truth. Humanity had infiltrated their system so completely that they could disable everything at will. If the humans had wanted to destroy those installations, everyone inside them would have died. The choice to leave them alive was a mercy, and everyone understood it. General Krevnak stood in his flagship's command center, staring at reports from all 17 installations. His scales had gone pale with shock. Every installation reported the same thing: complete systems failure with no physical damage. His engineers were trying to restore functionality, but they were finding that the human intrusion had been so thorough that they would need to rebuild many systems from scratch. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his chief technical officer. "These are military-grade systems with multiple layers of security. How did they penetrate everything?" The technical officer's voice was shaken. "Sir, we have been buying components from human manufacturers for years. Navigation systems, communication relays, processor cores. If they built backdoors into those components from the beginning, they would have access to everything." Krevnak felt his blood run cold. The humans had not just defeated Kryn security. They had planned for this years in advance, building vulnerabilities into the very products they sold to Council militaries. The level of foresight and patience that required was staggering and terrifying. On the Council homeworld, the response to humanity's evidence and military demonstration was chaotic. Ambassador Zixthor's defection had already shocked the political establishment, but now protests filled the streets of the capital city. Younger species that had long felt marginalized by the older powers saw in humanity's struggle a mirror of their own frustrations. Chancellor Mora, 7 of the Tetran Republic, watched the protests from her office window. Her species had joined the Council only 50 years ago, and she remembered the condescending treatment they had received from established powers like the Kryn and Velians. She had worked her way up through the diplomatic corps, always feeling like an outsider, always aware that older species viewed her people as newcomers who needed to prove themselves. Now she saw an opportunity to change everything. The old guard that had dominated Council politics for centuries was discredited. Councillor Thexvar was under arrest. Other senior members were facing calls for resignation. The entire structure of galactic governance was vulnerable to reform in a way it had not been in living memory. Mora 7 called an emergency session of the Council, knowing that what she proposed would either save the institution or destroy it completely. The chamber was only half full, with many species having withdrawn or boycotted the proceedings. Those who remained looked shell-shocked, uncertain about what came next. "We stand at a crossroads," Mora 7 began, her voice carrying through the chamber. "The Council has failed in its most fundamental duty. We allowed crimes to be committed against a member species. We tolerated corruption and abuse of power. We treated newer species as inferior, and used our authority for purposes that violated every principle we claim to uphold." She pulled up holographic displays, showing the evidence from New Denver. "Humanity trusted us, and we betrayed that trust. Now they have shown us that they do not need the Council. They can survive alone. They have the strength to defend themselves and the moral courage to demand justice. The question we must answer is whether the Council deserves to survive. Councillor Vexillar of the Mantrin Cluster, one of the few remaining senior members, spoke up. You suggest we simply surrender to human demands? Accept whatever terms they dictate? I suggest we acknowledge reality, Morris-7 replied. Humanity is not making unreasonable demands. They want accountability for crimes committed. They want structural reforms to prevent future abuses. They want to be treated as equals. These are not the demands of conquerors. These are the demands of people who refuse to accept injustice. The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. Some species argued for maintaining the old order, insisting that council authority could not be allowed to bend to pressure. Others supported reform, recognizing that the alternative was the complete collapse of galactic governance. In the end, a majority voted to support Morris-7's proposal for comprehensive restructuring. President Helen Carter received the Council's formal proposal in a secure communication. She sat in her office reading through the terms with Director Paul Bennett and General Linda Shaw. The proposal included everything humanity had demanded: independent investigations into the experiments, prosecution of those responsible, structural reforms to Council governance, and formal recognition of humanity as an equal power with permanent representation on key committees. They are serious about this, Paul observed. Morris-7 has put her entire political career on the line. If we reject this, the Council probably collapses completely. Helen considered carefully. What do our people want? What do the survivors want? General Linda spoke quietly. The survivors want justice. They want to know that this will never happen again. They want the galaxy to remember what was done to them. Then we will accept, Helen decided. But we will insist on conducting the prosecutions ourselves on Earth, where we can ensure they are fair and transparent. The galaxy will watch, and they will see that humanity does not seek revenge but justice, Captain. Amy Rodriguez was promoted to full captain and given command of the human delegation that would escort Council investigators to the lost colonies. It was delicate work, allowing outsiders into human space to examine evidence while ensuring they could not gather intelligence for future operations. Amy approached the task with the careful precision that had defined her career. The Council investigators were a mix of species, carefully selected to represent different perspectives. They arrived at Haven, the former New Denver, with scientific equipment and recording devices. Amy watched them work, documenting everything they found, interviewing survivors, collecting samples. Their faces showed increasing horror as they understood the scale of what had been done. One investigator, a Pelian scientist named Dornak, approached Amy after a particularly difficult day of examining medical records. How do your people maintain such restraint? He asked. If this had been done to my species, we would have declared war immediately. We would have sought vengeance, not justice. Amy looked out over the colony where survivors were slowly rebuilding their lives. Vengeance does not bring back the dead, she said. It does not heal the wounded. Justice, real justice, means making sure this never happens again. That requires changing the system, not just punishing individuals. Dornak was quiet for a long moment. Your species has taught the galaxy a difficult lesson. Power without restraint is tyranny, but restraint without power is vulnerability. You have shown us that it is possible to possess both. Meanwhile, civilian engineer Danny Cooper was leading teams across human space, helping to rebuild the infrastructure that had been strained during the isolation. But he was also working on something else, a project that President Carter had authorized in secret. Human scientists and engineers were developing new technologies, advancing in directions that the Council had never explored. When humanity returned to galactic affairs, they would do so not just as equals, but as leaders in innovation. Dr. Karen Phillips, who had documented the horrors at the lost colonies, was working on a different kind of project. She was compiling testimonies from survivors into a permanent archive, a historical record that would preserve their stories for future generations. Every testimony was recorded, every medical record cataloged, every piece of evidence preserved. This is not just for legal proceedings, Karen explained to her team. This is for history. 1,000 years from now, people need to know what happened here. They need to understand the cost of allowing power to go unchecked. The archive would eventually become part of the memorial at Haven, accessible to anyone who wanted to understand what had happened and why it must never happen again. Former Ambassador Zixthor sat in protective custody in a human facility, working with prosecutors to prepare his testimony. He had betrayed his own government, turned against colleagues he had worked with for decades, all because he could no longer live with the guilt of his silence. Some called him a traitor. Others called him courageous. He did not care about either label. I enabled this through my silence, he told the human lawyer helping him prepare. I knew something was wrong, and I chose to trust the system rather than investigate. That choice cost thousands of lives. I cannot bring those people back, but I can help ensure those responsible face consequences. His testimony would prove crucial in the trials to come, providing insider knowledge of how decisions were made and who authorized what actions. But more than that, his defection sent a message to other council members who had doubts. It was possible to break with the old ways and survive. As the weeks passed and preparations continued for the trials, humanity maintained its defensive posture but allowed limited contact to resume. Ships carrying humanitarian aid were permitted to pass through human space. Refugees from economic collapse in council territory were accepted and given sanctuary. Trade resumed on a case-by-case basis with species that had supported reform. The message was clear. Humanity's quarrel was with the council leadership that had authorized crimes, not with ordinary people suffering from the consequences. This distinction won humanity allies across the galaxy. Species that saw in human behavior a model of how power should be exercised with moral responsibility. The trial began on a cold morning in Geneva, broadcast live across every inhabited system in the galaxy. The courtroom had been specially constructed for this purpose, large enough to accommodate representatives from 40 different species, but designed with human architectural sensibilities. President Helen Carter had insisted that the trial take place on Earth, in human territory, where the proceedings could not be influenced by council politics or intimidation. 23 council members sat in the defendant section, their faces showing various expressions of defiance, fear, or resignation. Councillor Thexavar of the Kryn Empire sat among them, his reptilian features set in an angry scowl. He still believed this was all theater, that political realities would eventually save him from real consequences. The prosecution was led by Attorney General Marcus Webb, a man who had spent 30 years building cases against the worst criminals humanity had produced. Now he faced his greatest challenge, prosecuting aliens for crimes against humanity while the entire galaxy watched. He stood before the court and began his opening statement. "This trial is not about revenge," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "It is about justice. It is about establishing that no species, no government, no individual is above the basic moral law that binds all sentient beings." The defendants authorized experiments on civilian populations. They treated thinking, feeling people as laboratory animals. They caused suffering and death on a massive scale. We will prove these facts beyond any doubt. The evidence was presented methodically over the following weeks. Medical records from New Denver, showing the progression of biological agents through the population. Video testimony from survivors, their voices breaking as they described watching their families die. Communications between council members discussing the experiments with cold clinical detachment. Financial records showing how the operations were funded through black budget allocations. Captain Lisa Hayes took the witness stand on the 15th day of the trial. She wore her dress uniform, every medal earned through years of service gleaming on her chest. The prosecutor asked her to describe the moment she learned about the experiments. "I was on patrol when the report came through," Lisa said, her voice steady but her hands gripping the edge of the witness box. "I read about New Denver, about what had been done there. I have 2 children, both younger than some of the victims. I thought about them being used as test subjects, being exposed to biological agents while someone took notes. I thought about how terrified they would be, how much they would suffer." Her voice broke slightly. "I served to protect humanity. I took an oath to defend our people. Learning that the Council, the organization we had trusted and worked with for decades, had done this to our civilians felt like a betrayal beyond words. Children were used in these experiments. Children who should have been safe, who should have been growing up on thriving colonies, died in agony for someone's research project." The courtroom was silent. Several of the council observers were visibly shaken. Even the judges, carefully selected to be neutral and impartial, looked affected by her testimony. The defense attempted to argue that the experiments were authorized security measures necessary to assess potential threats. Captain Jake Morrison dismantled this argument during his testimony by presenting evidence that humanity had filed 17 formal complaints about suspicious council activity in the years before the experiments. Each complaint had been ignored or dismissed. They knew we had concerns, Jake said, his voice hard. They knew we were watching them, and they proceeded anyway because they did not see us as equals deserving of respect. They saw us as problems to be solved, threats to be neutralized. That is not security policy. That is the thinking of those who view other sentient beings as inferior. Counselor Thexvar took the stand in his own defense, attempting to justify the attack on the mining outpost as a legitimate military response to human aggression. His lawyer had advised against this, but Thexvar's pride would not allow him to remain silent. The humans were encroaching on disputed territory, he said, his voice defensive. They were extracting resources from a system that had not been clearly allocated. We responded with appropriate force to protect council interests. The prosecutor, Marcus Webb, approached with a data tablet. Counselor Thexvar, I have here 17 separate communications from human authorities regarding the mining outpost. These communications, filed over a period of 2 years, clearly state that humanity claimed the system under established settlement law. Your government received every single one of these communications. You personally acknowledged 3 of them. How do you reconcile your claim of disputed territory with this evidence? Thexvar's scales flushed darker. Those claims were not valid under council law. Council law that humanity was no longer subject to, having withdrawn from the council, Marcus replied. So you attacked a civilian facility and territory that humans had properly claimed, killing 47 miners who were not soldiers, not combatants, but workers trying to earn a living. And you call this appropriate force? The counselor had no response that did not incriminate him further. He was dismissed from the stand, and his testimony became one of the most damaging pieces of evidence against him. Former Ambassador Zixthor provided testimony that proved crucial to the prosecution. He detailed private conversations where council members had discussed the need to manage humanity's expansion. He provided access codes to classified databases. He explained how the experiments were authorized through emergency security provisions that bypassed normal oversight. I knew something was wrong, Zixthor said, his 4 eyes downcast. I heard the whispers, saw the classified budget allocations. I told myself that the council leadership knew best, that they would not authorize anything truly wrong. I was a coward. I chose my career over my conscience, and thousands died because people like me looked away. His testimony was painful to watch, but it was also comprehensive and devastating. The defense had no effective response to an insider who knew where all the secrets were buried. The verdicts came after 2 months of testimony. The judges deliberated for 3 days, reviewing thousands of pages of evidence and hundreds of hours of testimony. When they returned, the chief judge, a human woman named Patricia Lane, read the verdicts with a voice that carried the weight of history. 19 of the 23 defendants were found guilty. 4 were acquitted due to insufficient evidence proving they knew about or authorized the experiments. Counselor Thexvar was found guilty on all charges, including the attack on the mining outpost, which was ruled an act of terrorism against civilian targets. The sentencing took another week. Thexvar received life imprisonment without possibility of parole, to be served in a human maximum security facility. He was also personally required to pay reparations to the families of every miner killed in the attack. Other guilty council members received sentences ranging from 20 years to life, depending on their level of involvement. Chancellor Mora VII of the Tetran Republic, who had led the Reformed Council through the crisis, addressed the galaxy in a broadcast from council headquarters. She was a younger leader, her species having only joined the council 50 years earlier, and she represented a new generation that was horrified by what the old guard had done. Today, justice was served, Mora VII said, but justice is not enough. The Galactic Council failed in its most basic duty, which is to protect all species under its authority. We failed humanity. We allowed arrogance and fear to override our principles. The Council must change fundamentally, or it should not exist at all. She outlined a series of reforms that would reshape the galactic government: mandatory transparency in all council operations, independent oversight committees with real authority, Equal representation for all member species regardless of age or size. A council security committee that would include rotating members from younger species, with veto power over military operations. And humanity, Morissevin continued, will be invited to return not as junior members, not as species to be managed, but as full equals with a permanent seat on the security committee. They have earned this through their courage and their unwillingness to accept injustice. President Helen Carter responded to the offer in an address to both humanity and the galaxy. She stood at the podium in the United World Government Assembly, her posture straight and her voice clear. Humanity will return to the galactic community, she said. But we return changed and we return with conditions. We will maintain our independence and our right to self-defense. We will never again place our trust in any government that does not earn that trust through actions, not words. The memorial for New Denver will become a permanent installation, open to all species, so that no one forgets what happens when power is exercised without accountability. Trade resumed gradually over the following months. The Pelian Assembly, which had stood with humanity during the crisis, received preferential trade agreements and technology-sharing arrangements. Other species that had supported reform were welcomed back into human space. Those that had remained silent or supported the old council leadership found human merchants less eager to deal with them. On the rebuilt colony world of New Denver, now renamed Haven, survivors gathered for the dedication of the memorial garden. The settlement had been reconstructed, but the population was still small, still healing. Captain Amy Rodriguez attended the ceremony. Standing among the crowd as the new governor, a survivor named Linda Price spoke. Linda had lost her husband and 2 children in the experiments. She walked with a cane now, her nervous system permanently damaged by the biological agents, but her voice was strong as she addressed the assembly. "We do not build this memorial out of hatred," Linda said. "We build it so that we remember. We remember what happened here. We remember those we lost, and we remember that justice is possible when people refuse to look away from evil. This garden will bloom with flowers from every human world and plants gifted by our alien allies. It represents life continuing, growing from the soil of tragedy." The garden featured a central monument, a simple black stone wall with the names of all 50,000 original colonists carved into its surface. Those who died were marked with dates. Those who survived had their names marked with a small star. Only 1,200 stars dotted the wall, small lights in an ocean of loss. Commander Greg Sullivan addressed the graduating class of the Human Fleet Academy 6 months after the trial concluded. The auditorium was filled with young officers who would shape humanity's future in the galaxy. Greg had been promoted to admiral after his successful operations during the crisis, and now he stood before these cadets with both pride and concern. "You enter service in a different galaxy than the one I joined 20 years ago," he told them. "Humanity is no longer the junior species seeking acceptance. We are a recognized power, respected and sometimes feared. This brings responsibility. Strength without wisdom is tyranny. Wisdom without strength is vulnerability. You must cultivate both." He paused, looking across the sea of young faces. "We did not seek the confrontation that defined this past year. We did not want to stand alone. But when we discovered that those we trusted had betrayed us, we did not hesitate. We withdrew. We prepared. We gathered evidence. And when the time came, we demanded justice and we backed that demand with strength." The cadets listened with absolute attention. They had all studied the crisis as part of their training, but hearing it from someone who had lived through it carried different weight. "You will face difficult decisions in your careers," Greg continued. "You will encounter species that respect us and species that resent us. You will see injustice and have to decide whether to act. Remember this, we are humanity. We stand together. We stand strong, and we stand ready for friendship or for defiance as the galaxy chooses." The graduating class stood as one, saluting sharply. Admiral Greg Sullivan returned the salute, seeing in their faces the future of humanity among the stars.